You've built a successful business, but have you built a successful estate plan? Most business owners haven't, and that could cost their families millions of dollars in the long run. Today we're going to be talking about the 7 biggest mistakes that most business owners make when it comes to a lack of planning. Today's guest is Nick Bjorklund, owner of Birch Grove Legal. We're going to spend some time talking about the missteps that we often see on a daily basis when it comes to overall financial planning, tax planning, and estate planning, and how to avoid some of those mistakes. So Nick, great to have you on the show today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of fun. This is going to be a great, interesting topic. It's something that, every day I'm having conversations with our clients, and I'm sure you are too, helping families to let's work to avoid mistakes. Let's not step on a landmine, and put ourselves in the best position. And when it comes to those mistakes of, estate planning, I think one of the biggest that I see every day is someone that works with an estate attorney, they work with a financial advisor, maybe even a couple of advisors. They have a CPA, they have an insurance person, they have a banker, they have all these people that work for them, all these smart people. And each one of them has a separate plan that was created at a different time with different objectives. And they don't have a cohesive plan that brings it all together. And then we end up with a lot of gaps, is what we find. The greater net worth that someone has, the bigger the gaps, the bigger the problems they can have in there with estate taxes, annual taxes that they're paying. What are some things that you see in that area when they have all these 5 people, 6 people, whatever it is, working for them, pretty educated, smart people with different certifications, degrees, everything that they have, but none of them have ever talked together. They've never spent any time together. They've never talked one-on-one to support that business owner.
Yeah. One thing I encounter all the time is, every planner has different goals that they're trying to help the client achieve, right? And for the ultra high net worth individuals, especially business owners, they've got a lot of things on their mind. And every professional they deal with has a different area of expertise. And so, the estate planner is going to be a lot more focused on estate taxes, generation skipping transfer taxes, and making sure things pass efficiently from that perspective. But maybe they're not as concerned with income taxes on an annual basis, right? Just like you mentioned. Right. And so, the CPA is going to be more focused on those income taxes, and a professional like yourself is going to be more focused on the income taxes and personal investments. And, having somebody that could quarterback that whole process can add a lot of value. I helped a business owner sell a business last year, and we encountered the same issue specifically in the sale, where I was helping with some estate planning and some estate tax leveraging, asset protection issues, and we had another professional involved who was trying to generate tax deductions to offset some of those gains, but neither of us knew about the existence of the other, and right. The CPA didn't know about either of us, right? And come tax time, April 15th, we're making an estimated payment, and the CPA didn't take into account any of the things that either of us had done. And so we ended up having to do cleanup after the fact because there wasn't somebody quarterbacking
some more
the process.
Time, money, all kinds of stuff. Then you started communicating.
Yes.
Right. Whereas it would have been nice to have that communication on the front end.
Yes.
And we see that all the time. Everyone, the biggest thing I hear from business owners is, I'm set. I have people that do all this. I'm all set, right?
Yeah.
But what we find is that the planning was segmented. It's not cohesive. It's not whole and integrated, all working together. And, the way I always equate it, and the example I always use is, if I had a basketball team, 5 different people on it, and if those 5 had never talked, never practiced together, they didn't have a playbook that they were following, they're all just acting independently, it's the same thing. That team is not going to win. But that team needs to win for that business owner. And the way to do that is to get everyone on the same page, communicating, working together to create that cohesive plan so that we can fill in and eliminate those gaps.
Yeah. Well, and you don't know what you don't know, right? And so the clients often aren't aware that there are even gaps in the plan at all. And so, somebody in my position as an estate planning attorney, I'm going to ask the client a bunch of questions that they don't know the answers to. They were probably told the answers to them at some point, but they've got other things to worry about.
Business owners
right?
go about 100 miles an hour with their hair on fire most of the time, and that's a good day.
Yeah,
Right.
and they're worried about running their business, not about whether they've ever filed a gift tax return, right?
Right.
They've got no idea. They've never heard of that before. So, so I think it's really useful when all the professionals are on the same page and they can all be headed in the same direction, where we can have good information sharing among each other and to deliver better service for the client that way.
At the end of the day, we all want the client to win,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And that's why we do what we do. So I think another area that ties into this is failing to separate business and personal wealth.
Yeah.
Right. And, whether that's having properties, in your personal name, blending business and personal assets, there's a lot of tax inefficiency there. You see it where you need proper structuring, you need to coordinate the financial planning, everything in there so that everything comes out correctly and we have a separation between that personal and business wealth. What are some mistakes that you see specifically on that?
Yeah,
end?
super important. You brought up a big one, which is a piece of property, right, that's used in the business, but might be in the individual's personal name.
I see it weekly.
It's all the time. Yeah.
All the time.
Right. I wish that clients could rely on their real estate agent to think of that, right? How are we going to title this piece of property? But you can't.
That's the other person that we need. That's somebody that's on the bench that
Right,
we need to bring
right.
them in every once in a while. The
Yes.
sixth player, right? The
That's
real estate
right.
agent.
Yeah.
That, again, there's just no communication and we're not thinking about that.
Right. Because they're in the business of finding the property that works best for the client, right?
Right.
They're not thinking about potential liability.
When we can separate the two, between personal and business, that allows us to do things such as extract wealth from the business over to our personal side.
Right.
And then we want to do things to protect that wealth and to grow it and help us to become financially independent of our business over here that is generating income and hopefully growing in value and so forth.
Yeah.
And overall, if we structure things the right way, again, in the long run, we can possibly reduce estate taxes. There's a lot that we can do.
Another thing that we encounter fairly often is businesses that are not optimally structured. With somebody like you helping out, we would advise them on how to better structure that sort of thing.
I was talking with a client this past week who owns multiple franchises in town of a restaurant. With some of those franchises, they also own the real estate underneath that franchise, not on all of them.
Yeah.
But with that, they have a separate entity that is a management company that manages the properties that they own, right?
Yeah.
So going through and setting things up properly provides a lot of efficiency. You can track things better from a tax perspective. There's a lot to gain versus just having everything in one big pile, right? And hope that it all works out, the right way. So, that proper entity structure, and getting into, okay, do we set up an entity in the state that you live in? Do we look at a different state?
Yeah.
There sometimes can be benefits to that. Clients' kids will reach out and we'll talk sometimes, and they'll say, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about starting a business.
Yeah.
And, I'll talk to them about, okay, let's talk about entity structure. Let's set this up the right way. And with that, they'll bring up, well, I can hop on the Secretary of State website and set up my own entity. Yes, you can do that.
Theoretically, yeah.
Theoretically, yes. But even in my spot, I've started numerous companies over the years. Yes, you can do that in a few minutes and only costs a few dollars. But I always use an attorney. What are some benefits and maybe some landmines that someone can hopefully avoid by using an attorney just on the front end to set up that entity structure?
A good attorney is also going to involve that kind of team approach that we talked about before, right? Involving the CPA, involving the investment advisor, all of that. But one of the really big, landmines that business owners can avoid or minimize the impact of by involving an attorney is if they have business partners, somebody to ask the questions about what's going to happen when you guys start disagreeing. Because every business owner that I've ever talked to when they start out thinks they're the exception to the rule. They're never going to get into
best
dispute.
friends.
We're
we
best
get
friends.
along great.
Right.
We've known each other for. I had 3
We grew
partners.
up together.
Yeah.
We're siblings. Whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yep.
And having that professional to ask the questions. Hey, I know you guys are getting along today, but that's not always going to be the case. If you have a few
Have you
bad
ever had
months-
an argument with your brother or sister?
Right.
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 Yeah, it's
Right.
going to happen. Right. I had a business with 3 other partners years ago. We started off all on the right foot. It was great. Come to find out, only 2 of us really worked hard,
Yeah,
and the
sure.
other two didn't, and we were the ones pulling our weight, right?
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make a change down the road, and it needed to be made, and you needed to have things in writing in order to do that.
Another thing that you can really plan for in advance, and it pays off to plan for in advance, is what happens when you're getting ready to retire. We start planning for that on the front end. It's a lot less cleanup that we have to do on the back end, right?
Right.
So how do we sell this to the next generation? How do we transfer it, even if it's not a sale, to the next generation?
Right. What does that operating agreement say? What does the buy-sell agreement say?
Yeah.
Again, and I had
How's it funded?
Yeah. How's it funded? I had another company with a partner who was younger than me, and unfortunately he passed. And, I bought his wife out, and she's in a wonderful financial position. But, with all that, having that operating agreement in place, laid out, and the buy sell, everything in there, what would happen if something happened to one of us, if we wanted to sell out our portion, or if we became sick, or if something happened to us. Having all that in writing kept it very simple. Then our attorney bill was also small because there wasn't a lot to do. It was fairly straightforward about just doing a quick valuation and writing a check, and it was very simple.
Yeah.
It was a tough situation, but it made that tough situation easier to handle by having that in writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how many clients who have come into my office for business help because a business partner died. We don't know what to do. We don't have an operating agreement. What are we going to do? Because I don't want to be in business with his wife, right?
Right.
With his surviving wife.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes you can't because they just don't have the ability or the licenses or whatever that may be. Or,
absolutely.
And you just don't want to. So this area here, when I'm talking with business owners, is, Kyle, I want to sell my business someday. I don't really have a plan. They won't say that. They just say, I want to sell it one day, or I want my kids to take it over. Without that buy-sell agreement or something in place, some type of structure to give you guidance, it can really make that situation difficult. Again, going back, we just touched on it. What if that business owner passes away and leaves that business to their family? Oftentimes, if a business has a decent valuation, you may end up with a fairly hefty tax. What I find is that in that situation, it often triggers the largest tax that you're going to pay in your lifetime. And now that family could be stuck with it if that business is worth enough above that estate tax exemption. Now we've got a problem there. Now we have to pay an estate tax. What are some planning ideas? What are some things that we can do around that area to look down the road and make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah. So as far as planning for the death of the business owner, we've got this illiquid asset, right? An operating business, for example, that could potentially be worth a lot to the next generation and is worth a lot, in valuation terms on the date of death. One of the things that we really employ a lot in planning for that is life insurance. So important to make sure that you have adequate life insurance coverage to pay that estate tax bill. We want to structure that properly so that it's not included in the taxable estate through the use of like an irrevocable life insurance trust. So it's off balance sheet, but still can be used to fund that estate tax bill by buying business interests from the estate.
There are a lot of examples of this over the years. If you pick up the newspaper and read, I think one example, the Joe Roby family years ago, back in the 90s, that owned the Miami Dolphins. Unfortunately, Mr. Roby passed away, and his family, there was some conflict in terms of who would run the Dolphins and how to manage the family estate. So there was some conflict in there, but also with that, they owed a $40 million estate tax. Well, they didn't have the cash for it. So if you don't have the cash for it, and they did not have any life insurance in place, they were forced to sell the Dolphins. And they sold the Dolphins. I believe the amount was roughly about $138 million. That was about 25 years ago. Today it's they're valued over $7 billion, right? Probably a mistake that could have been avoided if they had some life insurance in place to pay that estate tax.
Yeah, absolutely. There are other structures that we employ to protect those kinds of assets, moving them into irrevocable trusts during life through a series of gifts or sales of the asset. I mean, in that case, that's a pretty big asset, but if you chop it up into little pieces over time, right, and move it, still big sales, big transactions, but you can move a lot of that off balance sheet and lower that tax bill. And then even if they had to sell what was remaining, the remaining part of the dolphins, they still have some of this value preserved in trusts for the kids or grandkids or great grandkids. Yeah, with that kind of wealth, I mean, it's multi-generational.
Yeah. Being proactive and looking down the road. That was one of the things that Sam Walton did early in his career when he started Walmart. Was he initially took a lot of his shares and did a lot of estate planning, put those shares in the names of his children. And so as Walmart took off with that stock, it was already transferred. It was in his kids' names. Yeah. And he didn't, they worked to avoid a lot of that estate tax problem.
Yeah. The Walton family is a really interesting case. They transferred hundreds of millions of dollars of value with no transfer tax cost. There's actually a case out of the tax court about the Walton kids. They did a series of what are called grantor retained annuity trusts, which have no transfer tax cost based on the formulas that the IRS employs or that are built into the tax code. The valuation of those trusts was zero, but increase in value of the stock outgrew the valuation of the grants. And so they transferred, I think the case I'm thinking of was $100 million worth of stock for no transfer tax cost, which is phenomenal.
So taking the time and doing some planning and thinking up front.
Absolutely.
Right, paid off. I think one more piece that ties into this also is no succession plan. Yeah. I heard this from a family last week, which was, I want to be able to pass my business on to my kids. That's the number one answer that I hear all the time. Well, there's a big difference between that and actually being able to say, we have a plan in place. My daughter Rebecca is going to take over as CEO. The other 3 kids will all have equal shares, and they will be able to sell their shares if they choose at a fair value. And my wife, she will be bought out of the company and be financially independent and taken care of. But our daughter, Rebecca, she's going to run the company, and also having a plan that, we want to have this happen over a specific time period, 5 years or 10 years, because, we want to see that transfer happen to our kids, right? So if the kids actually do want to take it over, that's a big one, right?
It's a huge one, yeah. Right?
But there's a big difference between those two answers, or, saying, I want to transfer this to my kids, but actually having a plan in place and saying, here's who's going to run the company, here's how the shares are divided, my wife is going to be bought out, and everything's going to be, we just need to follow the plan. Right. Yep. Big difference there.
Yeah, I've seen it done well and poorly. This is a really common thing that farmers and ranchers encounter is, there's maybe one of the kids who wants to continue the business, right? Continue farming or ranching. The rest of the kids are off doing their own thing, which is great. We need doctors and lawyers, right?
Yep.
But there's only the one kid to run the ranch. But, in Wyoming, land values being what they are and minerals and all of that, the ranch could be worth, tens of millions of dollars in value that these other non-ranching kids are not going to benefit from. So how do we do that effectively? And the only way you really can is with a proper plan in place. And that plan needs to take into account the lives of all of the kids and, actually account for the facts on the ground.
Right.
Yeah. And as far as seeing it done well, at an event recently for a family that was celebrating having done it well, and they passed the whole business on to the kids over about 5 years of time, and then sold many of the assets in the business. The kids decided to sell out, probably about 2/3 of the assets of the business, and it was a tens of millions of dollars payday for each of the kids.
Imagine that, a party celebrating that it was done right.
Yeah.
And the kids all getting along. So it can be done correctly.
Oh, it can be done correctly.
It can be done correctly, right? I think this ties into our next topic, which I want to hit on just lightly here, which is overlooking family dynamics. Parents assuming that their kids want to run the business and that all the kids will inherit everything equally, all the shares across the board. But what I find often is that, the kids don't want to run the business. The kids may not have the ability to run the business, or maybe it's just rental properties. Do the kids actually, because they see mom and dad have retired, but they're still being landlords here. They're managing the 5, 10, 15 properties, whatever it is. And they see all the time and effort that mom and dad are putting in. And they're thinking, I don't want to be a landlord. I don't want to deal with all this and phone calls at 2 a.m. because the air conditioner went out and so forth. So I want to take my part and sell it. So having that plan in place there on the family dynamic piece, have you sat down with your kids to have that conversation? Do they want the business, and do they have the capacity to help run the business?
Yeah, so important. Ignoring that family dynamic is a very easy way to ruin your plan. Their first two questions to me are, how do I not create trust fund kids, the proverbial trust fund kid? And what do I do if one of my kids gets into drugs or alcohol or something like that? And having that conversation and planning for those eventualities, I think, is so important. We also encode the values of the wealth generating generation into the family documents, into the trust, through what's called precatory language.
Mm-hmm. The franchise owner I was talking with last week, he talked about when he created and started his first franchise, that he also had 2 jobs on top of that.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how he's got wonderful kids. They have degrees. They're doing well, but they don't have his same hunger and that work ethic to just do anything and everything, that it takes to get their business or career up and going. That, and he's concerned about, just how does he hand that, off? How does he get them to understand that, sometimes you have to really work hard to get the things that you want. Things aren't just handed to you. As we move into another area here, not having an estate plan. See this one every week where someone doesn't have a will, they don't have POAs, maybe they have a trust, but it's not funded.
Yeah.
Maybe it's old, an old will, old trust, it's not up to date. We could spend all day on this, but right, hitting this important piece here, making sure that we have a plan in place. What should a plan include? What are some key points that most everyone needs?
Yeah, for everyone, they at least need a will. They need powers of attorney, both medical and financial.
And let's talk about that. What is that? Because, we do this every day, right? POAs, power of attorney. So what's a financial and healthcare power of attorney?
Yeah, great question. A financial power of attorney appoints someone to make financial decisions for you if you're not able to make them yourself, but you're still alive. So, think you get in a car wreck, you're in a coma temporarily or indefinitely.
Up skiing here in Colorado.
Yeah.
Somebody bumps their head.
Right. The bills still need to be paid. The mortgage needs to be paid. The lights need to be kept on. The kids need to be provided for, all of that. Somebody has to be able to make those financial decisions. Usually that's going to be the spouse, but if you're in a common accident, it needs to be somebody else. And so I usually recommend to people that they have their spouse first, and then they have 2 backups. And that's for, financial matters. Then you can have a medical power of attorney as well, which is the same sort of thing, but for medical decisions. So it appoints somebody to make medical decisions for you if you're not able to make them yourself. And again, spouse plus 2 backups is what I'd recommend there. We can also do a living will or advance directive to make some of those medical decisions in advance. So, will I be kept on a ventilator? Will I not be kept on a ventilator? Will I be, given artificial hydration, nutrition, those sorts of questions? Those are really personal to people. Their religious values or, other moral values come into play in those. And so we help them make those in advance to make sure their wishes are followed.
Yeah.
Important.
It is. And it needs to also be reviewed.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to give a personal example here. It needs to be something that every couple of years you're going back and reviewing. And, I'm fortunate enough to have 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and they're wonderful. Trust them all, love them all. But my wife and I, we were going back through our will and trust and going back and trying to figure out, okay, who did we name as, our backups and executor and so forth, and going back over all that and trying to figure out, okay, who did we name to do what? But with all that, one of the things that we found was a mistake where in the will it talked to, it lays out, okay, if I end up in a coma, how long are you going to keep me on that ventilator before my wife's allowed to pull the plug? Well, on me, she could wait 30 days, right? Well, what we noticed on hers, it only said 3 days.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Yeah.
she wanted to know real quick why hers only said 3 days. And I said, look, that's got to be a
it's a
typo.
typo.
It's a typo.
There should be a zero there.
Right?
Yeah.
But okay, in that situation, now I'm going to, how do I, do you end up in front of a judge and argue that this is a typo, right? It probably is, right? But we went back through that and figured that out and, got that adjusted so that I can keep around for another 30, right? And hopefully we never need to go down that path. But this is something you need to review. Are the trustees, the executor, the beneficiaries all up to date, the backups, all that, and make sure that that's taken care of. Oftentimes we only do this during big life events, when we get married, when we have kids, when we're ready to retire, when I'm ready to sell my business. But it's something that needs to be updated every couple years. What I always tell people, think of the years that end in a 5 or a 0, 2020, 2025, 2030. Every 5 years, go back and review this, and just do a quick look. One of the things that I think is really helpful that I know your firm offers, and we do it for clients also, is just a summary of their will and trust. We have an AI program that will read those documents and give them a quick summary that they can always go back and refer to, because no one goes home and reads their will and trust. Just like when we set up investments, no one goes home and reads the prospectus, right? But having that quick summary that you can go to, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, and that software that you're referring to is great. It does a visual representation of the plan too. I find, and that's actually why I signed up with it in the first place. So I find clients really love a visual representation. I was doing them in PowerPoint before, and it's too time consuming.
You didn't go to law school to
I didn't
build
go
PowerPoints.
Right. It's definitely important to check your estate plan, review it anytime you have one of those big life events. But also, I think a regular review every 5 years, even every 3 years, is really important.
And as a business owner, maybe something that, they want to review it more often, because maybe when they first get that business up and going, you're trying to, keep the lights on. You're trying to get that business off the ground. So you put those documents in place, you put everything in there, everything, the will, the trust, everything that you need. But then if, let's say your business takes some nice leaps and it really moves forward, you're 2 or 3 years down the road, you may have gone from a $1 million valuation to a $20 million valuation, or maybe much more significant than that. Things can change quickly. So that's where you want to stay on top of things as a business owner, to review that regularly and make sure that your team is communicating.
I mentioned everybody should have a will and powers of attorney. I would say every business owner needs a trust as well, if for no other reason than to avoid probate. And yes, I agree that trust needs to be reviewed on a regular basis to make sure it matches with the business as it exists today, rather than as it existed when it was created. Your business that you think of as $1 million business could be worth 10 or 15 or 20 relatively rapidly.
Right.
When you add into it the potential for strategic acquisitions and stuff like that, being ready for the possibility of a valuation that's much, much higher than what you expect is a good idea.
And with all that, going to an attorney and having a trust drawn up, how far does that get you?
Nowhere. It's just a piece of paper at that
point. So we actually have to fund the trust.
Absolutely.
Right?
So important.
And that was one of the areas, when we look back, talking about celebrities a little bit here, but Michael Jackson had a trust, but he never funded it. That's like buying a safe for my home and never putting anything into it.
Right.
And just leaving items that are personal, that are valuable, that I want to protect, and just leaving them scattered throughout the house. So when we talk about fund a trust, what does that mean with different business and personal assets?
So a trust is like a container. It can contain all of your assets, and then it has rules on how those things are dealt with. But it doesn't do anything to assets that are not owned by it, right? And so for your personal assets, we would assign those assets to the trust, whether that's drawing up deeds to retitle real estate into the name of the trust, or we'll assign personal property, those sorts of things into the trust as well, retitling bank accounts or changing beneficiaries on bank or investment accounts. Sometimes it's a hassle, or it's impossible to, in the case of like retirement accounts, to actually retitle them in the name of the trust. So we do beneficiary designations instead.
Right.
For businesses, the business owns the assets within the business, and so we don't have to do anything there. But, we need to make sure that the ownership interests in the business are assigned to the trust, right? So for, LLCs, that's an assignment of membership interest. For corporations, it's a stock power It depends on the kind of business that it is.
So we see that often where, I'll sit down with families, and we'll talk through, okay, you have a trust. And I'll ask them, the first question I ask is it funded?
Yeah.
And they usually
And they
just sit
say,
there with
"What?
a blank spare.
What does that mean?"
Right. That's exactly what you get, right?
Yeah.
So this is where, that team making sure that, hey, that an estate attorney just didn't put a trust in place for you, that the next steps, the most important piece were taken, those next steps, which were, did we actually fund it? Did the title of your house, was that changed and updated to the trust? Did we update beneficiaries and ownership to accounts and so forth, right? To make sure that that's taken care of.
Yeah, I think that team approach is so helpful there too, because I always give clients instructions on how to retitle accounts and all of that. Sometimes they get busy and then they kind of drop off the face of the earth, and
right.
Maybe they did, maybe they didn't.
Right. And what I find is often they're thinking, okay, well, now I have to go meet with my banker. I have to go meet with my financial advisor. I have to go meet with my insurance person. I have to go meet with all these people now
accountant.
And tell them everything I need to do. Versus if we're taking that team approach, they don't have to do all that. It's simply on my end that we send them a quick DocuSign link. They hit a couple buttons and everything's updated on our end.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to take that off their plate and quarterback that situation and make sure that that's done.
That's why I like working with you guys, Kyle.
Yeah, we do our best to try and make it easy. Our seventh area here, this is a big one because I've seen it impact my family. I've seen it impact clients, which is failing to protect against disability, not just death.
Yeah.
So disability, when I look at, especially people in professional areas of practice, an attorney, a financial advisor. I had a dentist that we worked with for years that owned multiple practices. And she was young, in her late 30s at the time. Her back, she really had some issues there, being over patients in a chair all day long. She had multiple surgeries. Got to where she could not practice anymore and was forced to sell her business by the time she was 40 years old.
Yeah.
And what is she going to do for the rest of her life? That's all she's done for almost, coming up on 20 years there.
Yeah.
Being a dentist, had a fantastic business. But luckily, I encouraged her to get a disability policy in place. She was able to replace her income. She's in a great position, to be able to take care of her family and her kids and everything, and not miss a beat financially.
Yeah.
What are some things and maybe some mistakes that you see on that end, or things that we just don't think about?
Oh, yeah. That's so common of an issue. It's much more common for people to get a disabling injury while owning their business than to die while owning their business, right?
Right.
Typically, they're going to retire and then eventually pass away. One of the things that people really need to think about is who's going to continue operating my business if I become disabled.
That succession plan.
Yes.
Need that in place.
And don't wait until you're about to retire to start thinking about that. And if there isn't anybody, how am I going to sell this for what it's actually worth rather than as a distressed asset if something happens to me?
Right. If you're forced to sell that distressed asset, now you're getting a much lower valuation. You're going to get not the amount that you believe or that business should be worth.
Yeah. Disability insurance is so important for that. Making sure that your financial agent is also at least aware of the business and how it operates and who's got the records and that those sorts of things.
Right. Let's say a business owner does buy disability insurance, but maybe they truly become, incapacitated in a big way.
Yeah.
Their spouse may not even know that they have that policy, right?
Yeah.
There could be a lot of things going on there, right?
Yeah.
So this is where, again, a team approach, having that cohesive, holistic plan in place, making sure that everyone's on the same page, making sure that, we have everything. I know when I first was getting going with the company, with Edrock and building the company up, one of the first things that I did right after we got married and we had a baby on the way, I went and bought a pretty big disability policy.
Yeah.
And with that over the years, made sure that we updated it. And I bought one that also increased with inflation over time.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to make sure that, my family in the long run was taken care of. It's not a cheap product. It's not a cheap policy, right? But I know I sleep a lot better at night knowing that I have that in place.
Yeah. It's not inexpensive, but it's not cheap, I guess is the best word. Yeah. It's super valuable.
It is.
Yeah.
I think gives you that peace of mind. And when you have all of this, when you have everything in place with the right trust, the right will, disability, all that. But how do you get those things? It's about, I think if you have the right team in place to provide all those things, and they're communicating, they're working together, they're working on your behalf versus independently and siloed, then you end up with the right plan. If you're a business owner and you're unsure about, your estate plan, how that stacks up, tax planning, financial planning, and so forth, this is what we do together, and if someone has a CPA, happy to work with them, or, and so forth. We'll work with your current team. But if you're missing pieces of that team, let's bring the right people in place so that, you as a business owner can get ahead and be in the right position and sleep well at night and get that outcome. It's all about the outcome in the long run. And I think a lot of that comes down to that proactive piece, having a team that's working for you versus individual siloed professionals.
Yeah, I said it before, but you don't know what you don't know, right? And there are things that I know that other professionals don't know, and there are things that you know that other professionals don't know.
That's right. You can't go to a doctor for everything. You have a cardiovascular surgeon, right? An orthopedic surgeon, and so forth, right? You have all these different professionals that are specialized in their areas. Let's get them on the team.
Yeah. We've got all these specialists who do one really specific thing, and they know more about that one specific thing than anybody else anywhere, right?
That's right.
And you get a better outcome as a result of that. And so I think the team approach is so important.
Yeah. A small amount of proactive planning, that's going to save your family conflict. It can save them tax dollars. It can, keep everyone together so we can have that celebration party at the end from, mom and dad or whomever working so hard to build a business and getting the outcome that we want versus no one's talking at Christmas and no one's together, right? And we end up with problems. And, and we want to work to avoid that. So.
Yeah, there are so many horror stories of, it just didn't work out because, people didn't plan the right way up front. And, the accountants and the investment advisors, the insurance people, and the lawyers, they weren't talking to each other.
Yeah.
And, nobody asked about family dynamics, right? That's such an important piece. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's a big one. That it's just an area that isn't talked about. Nick, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Probably the website's the easiest to rattle off on a podcast here. It's www.birchgrovelegal.com.
Great. Nick, it's great to have you on. And I think we can have, hopefully more of these conversations down the road. If any of our listeners have questions, please put those down below. Like and subscribe. We'll, keep doing this again down the road. Keep talking about, mistakes to avoid as a business owner and how to put yourself in a position to get that outcome that you want.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick.